All right. Welcome. Today, we are putting on our detective hats and diving deep into the New Testament. Our investigation is going to center on one specific document, the epistle to the Colossians, and the subtle interlocking clues that argue for its authenticity.
So how do you actually test an ancient document like this? You don't look for the big, obvious stuff, the perfect agreements. No, you look for something much, much more subtle. You look for the tiny, interlocking details that a forger would never even think to invent. These are called undesigned coincidences, and as we're about to see, the book of Colossians is just full of them. Okay, let's crack open our first case file. Now, the Apostle Paul often calls himself a prisoner, right? But the specific reason why he was locked up is revealed in this really fascinating subtle link between his letter to the Colossians and the historical book of Acts.
Now, check out this connection. It's so subtle. In Colossians, Paul gives this grand theological reason for his chains. He's a prisoner for you Gentiles. But then you flip over to the book of Acts, and you get this street-level view of what actually happened. A mob in Jerusalem erupts in fury the very moment he mentions that specific mission to them.
You see how that works? The letter gives you the why, the big picture reason. And the history in Acts shows you the how, the actual event that landed him in chains. A forger would never create such a nuanced connection. They just make the stories match word for word. This is what truth looks like. Different perspectives on the same reality, fitting together perfectly without even trying.
All right, let's move on to case file number 2, and you'll see how this concept starts to build. This one kicks off with a mystery. A really bitter argument between two of the earliest Christian leaders that just seems to come out of absolutely nowhere. So the book of Acts tells us that Paul and his own mentor Barnabas had this massive falling out. I mean, it was so bad, they actually went their separate ways. The whole thing was about whether to take a young guy named Mark on their next trip. Paul was dead set against it, but Barnabas was just incredibly stubborn about it. And the history never really tells you why. Why did Barnabas dig in his heels so hard for this one guy?
Well, the answer isn't in Acts at all. It's hidden away in a totally casual, offhand greeting in the letter to the Colossians. Paul just happens to mention that Mark is Barnabas's nephew, and boom, the puzzle is solved, just like that. Acts gives us this unexplained historical fight, and Colossians, written for a totally different reason, just happens to give us the key: family loyalty. Of course he'd defend his nephew. It's a detail that's so perfectly human and so subtly dropped in, it just feels real.
Okay, on to case file number 3. This one is like a classic who was he. We're on the hunt for clues about the identity of one of the most important writers in the New Testament, the guy who wrote both the Gospel of Luke and the book of Acts.
And where do we look? You guessed it, back to the letter to the Colossians right near the end. Paul's listing off his buddies who are with him in prison. He names a few guys: Aristarchus, Marcus, and Jesus Justus, and then he adds this little note. He says these guys are of the circumcision. Basically, they're Jewish.
Okay, so he makes that little side note. Then he continues the list with a few more names: Epaphras, Demas, and there he is, Luke. See what he did there? By splitting the list into 2 parts, the Jewish guys and then everyone else, Paul is strongly implying that this second group, including Luke, were Gentiles, non-Jews. Now that's a really cool clue, but can we find a matching hint in Luke's own writing that confirms it?
Oh yeah, we can. In the book of Acts, which Luke wrote, he's describing a place in Jerusalem, and he says it's called Aceldama, in their proper tongue. Now think about that phrasing, in their tongue. You only talk like that when you're an outsider looking in. A native Jewish writer wouldn't need to explain the local language to his audience.
And that right there is a perfect example of how this works. You've got 2 totally separate documents. One gives you a clue hidden in the structure of a list. The other gives you a clue in a single, subtle turn of phrase. They are completely different kinds of evidence, yet they both point to the exact same conclusion: Luke was a Gentile. All right, time for our final case file. And honestly, this one is the most intricate of them all. This is a fantastic piece of detective work that requires us to connect the dots across 3 different ancient documents just to check one single, simple statement. So in his letter to the church in Colossae, Paul mentions the guy delivering the letter, a man named Onesimus, and he says he is one of you. In other words, he's a local guy from their town. Seems pretty straightforward, right? But wait a minute. How on earth could we possibly verify that? A forger could just make that up to make the letter sound more authentic. Well, this is where the puzzle gets really cool. To solve it, we need to pull in another one of Paul's letters. Okay, clue number 1. We look at a really short, personal letter Paul wrote to a guy named Philemon. And in that letter, we learn that this exact same guy, Onesimus, is actually Philemon's runaway slave, who Paul is now sending back home. So step 1 is simple. Onesimus is the slave of Philemon.
Okay, clue number 2, and we're staying in that same short letter to Philemon. The letter isn't just to Philemon, it's also addressed to a man named Archippus. Now, this is the key. It means Philemon and Archippus are in the same circle, part of the same church, they live in the same city.
And now, for the final piece of the puzzle, clue number 3. We go right back to our main document, the letter to the Colossians. And what do we find at the very end? Paul gives a direct, personal shout-out to a leader in their church. And who is it? He says, tell Archippus, the very same guy. This nails it down. Archippus is definitely part of the Colossian church.
So let's just lay it all out. The logic is just airtight. 1, from Colossians, we know Archippus is a Colossian. 2, from the letter to Philemon, we know he's a close associate of Philemon, which means Philemon must also be a Colossian. And 3, since Onesimus is Philemon's slave, that means Onesimus is, in fact, a Colossian. The original claim is proven true, but you could only do it by piecing together these scattered clues. No forger would ever construct a proof that complicated. It's the hallmark of reality.
Okay, so after all that detective work, what's the big takeaway here? What does this all add up to?
I mean, think about what we've seen. We looked at 4 totally separate case files. We found clues scattered across different books that revealed the real reason Paul was in prison. We uncovered a hidden family secret that explained a really weird argument. We used a tiny linguistic fingerprint to figure out an author's background. And we solved a puzzle spanning 3 documents just to confirm where one guy was from.
As the historian William Paley argued centuries ago, it's one thing for a fake story to get the big plot points to agree, but for separate, independent accounts to just happen to line up on these tiny, obscure, interlocking details, well, that's almost impossible without the truth there to guide them.
You see, this incredible consistency doesn't just suggest that these individual letters are authentic. It points to a real, solid history underneath it all. And that leaves us with one final and, I think, pretty provocative thought. If all these tiny, easily missed details hold up under such close inspection, what might that imply about the much bigger story they're all a part of?